It starts with a kiosk. Not some fancy place, just a corner shop that sold cigarettes, snacks, lottery tickets, the kind of place that always seems like it's too small to matter. But to me back then, it was everything. I wasn't desperate, not exactly, but I was impatient. Impatient with life, with bills piling up, with the sense that I was invisible, while everyone else moved ahead. I had done smaller stuff before, shoplifting, a few petty scams, but this was different. Bigger. Riskier. And it wasn't just about the money. It was the thrill, the power of knowing I could take control, of bending someone else's day to my will without them even realizing it until it was too late. I remember thinking that night, walking past the kiosk as it glowed under the harsh fluorescent light, if I do this, there's no turning back. And yet, something in me didn't care. Something in me wanted to see if I could actually pull it off. People think crimes like this happen on impulse, and maybe that's true for some, but not for me, not then. I spent days circling that kiosk like a stray dog looking for a weakness. I wasn't mapping escape routes or studying police response times or anything dramatic like that. It was simpler, more pathetic. I was trying to convince myself I had the guts to do it. I watched who worked which shifts. I noticed how the old man who usually closed up would step outside to smoke around 10:30, leaving the door propped open with a crate. I took note of the neighboring businesses. Most closed early, lights off by 9, leaving the street dim and quiet. I told myself I was being smart, but really I was just feeding the part of me that wanted an excuse. I remember standing in the mirror the night before, rehearsing lines I thought would make me sound threatening. It was ridiculous. My voice cracked twice. Still, I shoved an old scarf into my jacket pocket and told myself I'd use it to cover my face. I didn't feel like a mastermind. I felt like a man trying too hard to play one. But the worst part, even with all the nerves, there was this twisted excitement buzzing in my chest. Like I was stepping into a version of myself that I'd been imagining for years, stronger, bolder, untouchable. I see now that the excitement was just fear wearing a cheap mask. The night it happened, the air felt thick enough to choke on. I kept telling myself I'd bail, that I'd just walk past the kiosk like any normal night. But my legs had their own plan. I followed the same route, same timing, like I'd rehearsed it. When I reached the kiosk, the old man wasn't outside smoking like usual. Instead, he was behind the counter talking to a younger guy I'd never seen before, maybe a relative, maybe just someone filling in. That wasn't part of my plan, if you could call it that. My pulse spiked. I should have turned around. I should have gone home. But they both looked up at me at the same time, and something in me snapped. Not anger, panic. They caught my gaze, and suddenly I felt exposed, like they already knew what I was thinking. It was a stupid thought, irrational, but once it hit me, everything spiraled. I stepped inside anyway. My voice came out harsher than I intended, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep them steady. The whole scene went sideways immediately, questions, confusion, fear flashing across their faces. I hadn't expected any of it. I wasn't prepared for real people reacting like real people. And standing there under those awful buzzing lights, I realized I wasn't in control of anything, not them, not the situation, not even myself. I wish I could tell you that I walked out. That I swallowed my pride, muttered some excuse, and left those two men to finish their night in peace. But that isn't what happened. What I remember most clearly isn't the noise or the chaos. It's the look on their faces when they realized something was wrong. A shift, a tightening around the eyes, that instinctive fear people get when they sense danger before they fully understand it. Their fear hit me harder than anything else. It was like being shoved into a version of myself I didn't recognize. I didn't have a plan anymore, just panic. Every second I stayed there, the room felt smaller, hotter. My thoughts wouldn't line up. They blurred into this frantic mess where every possible outcome felt like it was crashing toward me at once. I kept telling myself to calm down, to think, to stop, but my body moved faster than my brain. The younger guy tried to say something, maybe to reason with me, maybe to calm me down. But I heard it as a threat, or an accusation, or maybe just proof that I'd already gone too far. And in that tiny, suffocating space, with my heart slamming against my ribs, I made the worst decision of my life. I didn't go in wanting to hurt anyone. I need to make that clear. But when everything boiled over and I felt trapped, cornered by my own stupidity, I reacted in the most cowardly way imaginable. Not out of power, not out of malice, out of fear. Pure, blinding fear. And the second it was over, seconds that felt like a lifetime, I knew the line I'd crossed wasn't one you can ever come back from. I ran. I don't even remember how. 1 second I was there, heart hammering, mind screaming, and the next I was outside, gulping air like I'd never tasted it before. The street was empty, dimly lit, silent except for my own ragged breathing. I couldn't think straight, couldn't process what I had just done. All I knew was that I had to move, had to disappear into the night. But running didn't make the panic go away. Every shadow looked like someone following me. Every distant sound, a car door slamming, a dog barking, felt like it was meant to catch me. And the guilt, it hit like a physical weight, crushing and unrelenting. I'd crossed the line, and there was no turning back. I found a corner, somewhere I could hide, and just sat there. My hands were trembling so badly I couldn't hold my face steady. My thoughts were chaotic. Why did I do this? How did I let it get this far? What now? I felt sick, nauseated, like my stomach had flipped inside out. And yet there was this other part of me, the part that had always wanted to test myself, that still buzzed faintly with some twisted adrenaline. That night I didn't sleep. I just wandered the streets, replaying everything over and over, imagining every possible consequence. Cops, witnesses, the families of those people, every scenario spiraled in my head. And every scenario ended the same way, me alone, terrified, trapped by my own choices. By the time dawn crept in, I was exhausted, hollow, and terrified, not of being caught, but of what I had become in that single night. The days after. I don't even know how to describe them. It's like living in a fog that smells faintly of smoke and fear. I kept replaying the night over and over in my head, trying to convince myself that it had been an accident, that I didn't mean for it to go so far. But deep down, I knew the truth, I did it. And no mental gymnastics could erase that. I was hyper-aware of everything. Every knock on the door made me jump. Every siren outside felt like it was screaming my name. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything besides the faces I'd seen in those last moments. Their eyes wide, the fear etched in every line of their expressions. I tried to tell myself I was still in control. That if I just stayed calm, if I just kept moving, no one would catch me. But control is a lie. I'd learned that the hard way. That night had proven it. One bad decision, one flicker of panic, and your whole life can change forever. And even as I convinced myself I could survive it, there was a gnawing guilt eating me from the inside. It wasn't just fear of being caught, it was shame, disgust, and a sick, burning regret. I realized something that night I didn't want to admit. You can't outrun what you've done. It's strange how a single night can start to warp everything else around you. I went about my life, pretending like nothing had happened, but nothing was the same. Every time I saw a uniformed officer, every time someone glanced at me in the street, my heart jumped. I started imagining that the smallest slip, an unfamiliar face in the news, a random police checkpoint, could expose me. I watched the news obsessively, waiting for a report about the kiosk, about the people I'd hurt. Every vague headline felt like a threat. I kept thinking, they're looking for me. They know it was me. And part of me wanted them to know. Wanted to be caught. Wanted the punishment because the guilt was suffocating. I became meticulous with small things. Every interaction, every movement, every tiny detail had to be right. I tried convincing myself that was normal, that everyone is careful in their lives, but I knew it wasn't. I was different now, I wasn't just a man who made a mistake. I was someone who had stepped into a darkness that didn't easily let go. Even now, years later, I can feel that tension in my chest. That night left a mark, one that never fully fades. And the worst part? It wasn't just fear or paranoia. It was knowing that I had looked into people's eyes and crossed a line I could never uncross. It's one thing to survive a night like that. It's another to survive yourself. After the initial panic faded, I was left with this heavy, relentless self-awareness. Every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the man I thought I was. I saw someone who could cross lines, who could destroy lives, and who somehow lived with it. I started replaying their faces constantly. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet moments, eating alone, walking home, lying in bed. Their fear, their confusion, it haunted me. I tried to push it down, rationalize it, say it wasn't entirely my fault, that circumstances forced me, but deep down, I knew I'd made choices. Choices I couldn't undo. It changed how I interacted with people, too. I became quieter, more guarded, constantly analyzing reactions. I didn't trust myself, and I didn't trust anyone else. It was like carrying an invisible weight that only I could feel, one that made me hyper-aware of every detail in the world around me. And yet, there was a strange, terrible thrill that lingered too. I hated it, but it reminded me that I was alive, that I had tested the limits of myself. That thrill and the guilt became two sides of the same coin, spinning endlessly in my chest. For a long time, I tried to tell myself stories about that night. Little mental excuses that made it feel like it wasn't entirely my fault. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was instinct, maybe I was pushed into it by circumstance. I even started convincing myself that no one would ever know, that the world would forget, and somehow, that was supposed to make it okay. But those excuses were fragile. Thin as paper. Every time I imagined the kiosk, the men behind the counter, every second of their fear, I felt my own stomach twist. The reality didn't bend to my justifications. It just sat there, heavy, a constant reminder that I had done something irreversible. Paranoia crept in too. I started noticing every detail. People glancing my way, police cars in the distance, news reports about robberies that weren't even mine. My mind was constantly connecting dots that didn't exist, imagining consequences that hadn't happened yet. I felt hunted, not by anyone else, but by the memory of what I'd done. And maybe that was worse. Being afraid of your own actions, knowing that the line you cross changes you forever, and that no amount of running or hiding will erase it, that's a kind of punishment no one can see. After that night, I stopped being fully present in my own life. People around me noticed I had changed, though I don't think they understood how completely. I laughed less, spoke less, and I started avoiding anyone who might ask questions, anyone who might look too closely at me. The world felt sharper somehow, like every sound was louder, every shadow deeper. I couldn't escape my own thoughts. Even when I tried to distract myself with work, with TV, with meaningless routines, the memory would creep back in. It was always there, the fear, the adrenaline, the guilt twisting together into this knot in my chest that never loosened. I realized I didn't just fear being caught by the law. I feared being caught by myself. That part of me that had done it, that had looked into their eyes and crossed the line. I didn't recognize him, and I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. Isolation became my shield. Staying quiet, keeping to myself, pretending nothing had happened, it was easier than facing anyone, including myself. But it came at a cost. I felt myself shrinking, piece by piece, the man I had been before that night disappearing behind walls of fear and regret. There were moments when I almost got caught, small things at first, like a passerby recognizing me near the kiosk, or someone mentioning a robbery that sounded too close to mine. My chest would tighten, my hands would shake, and I'd convince myself that luck was the only reason I hadn't been discovered yet. Every near miss dug deeper into my guilt. I started seeing the world as a series of threats, every casual glance or unexpected sound a reminder that I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. I couldn't talk to anyone about it, couldn't share the burden, so it just festered inside me. And the guilt, it was more than just fear. It became this relentless presence, whispering that I didn't deserve happiness, that I was unworthy of normal life. I kept replaying the scene over and over, imagining every possible way I could have done things differently, knowing none of it would change what happened. It wasn't just a memory anymore, it was a constant shadow following me, shaping every decision, every interaction. And I began to realize that the person I had become that night wasn't someone I could leave behind. After that night, every part of my life became a careful calculation. I looked over my shoulder constantly, double-checked every interaction, and avoided places that might trigger memories. Even mundane things, a corner store, a crowded street, a stranger's gaze, felt like potential threats. I couldn't stop thinking about the possibility of being recognized, caught, or exposed. It wasn't just the law I feared, it was the judgment, the knowledge that people would see the truth of what I had done. That fear shaped everything, how I dressed, how I walked, how I spoke. I became invisible by habit, keeping my head down, blending into the background. But even invisibility didn't help. The memory of that night followed me everywhere, haunting quiet moments and intruding into sleep. I felt like a prisoner of my own actions, trapped by the choices I had made, and the realization that there was no going back was suffocating. And worse, I could never fully let anyone in. Even those closest to me didn't know this version of myself existed, and I feared that if they did, they'd see the darkness I carried and never forgive me, or worse, they'd recognize that same darkness in themselves. Over time, I realized that the man I had been before that night no longer existed. It wasn't just the memory of what I did, it was the way it reshaped me. I became someone cautious, haunted, constantly analyzing every choice. I started seeing the world through the lens of that night, measuring risk and guilt in ways I never had before. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the old me in reflections or old photographs, and it would hit me like a punch. That person, carefree, naive, oblivious to consequences, was gone. In their place was someone always on edge, always carrying the weight of choices I couldn't undo. I tried to rationalize it. I survived. I didn't get caught. I can live with this. But rationalizations are fragile. Deep down, I knew I was living with a version of myself I didn't recognize, someone capable of actions I had once thought unthinkable. And the knowledge of that capability, of what I could do under pressure, was a burden I carried every day. Sometimes, late at night, I would wonder if anyone ever truly recovers from a moment like that. I don't think they do. You just learn to live with the echo, the constant reminder that choices matter, and that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. If there's one thing that night taught me, it's that actions have consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes invisible, and sometimes they follow you for decades. I learned painfully that fear and impulse can make you do things you never imagined you were capable of. And once it happens, the guilt doesn't just fade, it becomes part of who you are. I've thought about warning others, strangers, younger people, anyone who might feel invincible in the face of temptation. But it's hard to put into words. You can tell someone, don't cross the line. But you can't convey the way it changes you, the way it lingers in every quiet moment. The adrenaline, the panic, the regret, they aren't things you can prepare for. I also learned that hiding doesn't solve anything. I spent years tiptoeing through life, trying to erase what I'd done, and it didn't help. It only sharpened the memory, made it more vivid, more permanent. You can't outrun yourself. And maybe the harshest lesson of all is this: the worst consequences aren't always legal, they're the ones that live inside you. The fear, the shame, the self-loathing, those don't go away. They shape the way you see the world, the way you see yourself, and the way you'll never feel truly free again. Looking back now, I can see clearly how that night changed everything. I survived the law, yes, but I didn't survive myself in the same way. The man I was before, the man who could make mistakes and move on, he's gone. In his place is someone constantly aware of what he's capable of, someone who carries the consequences of fear, impulse, and regret every single day. If I could talk to my past self, I'd tell him to stop, to walk away, to realize that the temporary rush of power or thrill isn't worth a lifetime of guilt. There's no undo button, no reset. Once the line is crossed, it marks you forever, and it doesn't matter if anyone else knows, it marks you. I've learned to live with it, not in peace, but in acceptance. Every decision I make now is filtered through that memory, every moral choice weighed more carefully. I can't change what happened, and I can't make myself unsee what I've seen or unfeel what I felt. So my warning, my advice is simple: think before you act. Fear and adrenaline can make you do unthinkable things, and the consequences don't just disappear when the danger passes. They stay. They follow you. And sometimes, the real punishment isn't what anyone else does to you, it's what you do to yourself. That's the story. That's my life since that night. And I carry it every day,